evil children, absentee parents, and twisted birthday celebrations. We're not talking about MTV's My Sweet 16. This is The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is a 2018 dark gothic horror drama based off of the comic book of the same name. Roberto Aguirre Sacasa is the writer of the show and the books themselves. He had 10 other writers who helped adapt each episode with him, but he was the main creative force behind the show and, again, the comic books. He also wrote Season 2, which will be out in April. Kiernan Shipka of Mad Men fame plays the titular character of Sabrina. She was also in the movie Carriers, and she has done countless voiceover work for cartoons. The rest of the cast is just as fantastic, but the thing is, there's way too many people to name, way too many standout performances, so I'm just going to leave it at that. Lisa Soper is the award-winning production designer of the show. She did the movie The Awakening of the Zodiac and The House at the End of the Street. So Sabrina is an all-American teenage girl, but she just happens to be half witch, half mortal. And on her Sweet 16, she's going to have to choose whether she wants to go all in on the witch side or she wants to cling to her humanity. And of course, whatever she chooses will have serious consequences for one side or the other. So as you guys know, when I'm talking about shows, I talk about the good, the bad, and then I give you my score. That being said, let's start with the good. Unlike its sister show Riverdale, which embraces, campiness, a little bit of cheese, and just a touch of darkness, Sabrina goes all in with the darkness. The subject matter can get really dark at times on the show, which I enjoy very much, and it has this great dark gothic horror aesthetic all the way through. And it even has elements of the occult in it. It juggles all this stuff with great effect. It brings it all together very nicely into one sweet package. Honestly, I wasn't going to watch it. I expected a by the numbers tween drama with a little bit of darkness thrown in there to maybe add some flavor to it. But about 5 minutes into the first episode, when something really shocking happens, I was hooked. I was like, okay, this show looks dope as hell. It's very dark. I'm already seeing some blood and some really cool stuff. And they referenced George Romero's Night of the Living Dead straight away. That's good stuff. Honestly, I think this is the best female-led horror show since Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And that's saying a lot because I love Buffy. But unlike Buffy the Vampire Slayer, there is no kung fu in this show. But it is kick-ass and it is full of great violence and gore, which you guys know are two of my favorite things. Like I said earlier, the acting in this show is stellar. Everybody all across the board is rock solid, and it really adds a lot of depth to the show. You can tell they're having a good time with their material, and they do have some strong material here. Kiernan Shipka's Sabrina has the right touch of innocence and idealism, and a bit of darkness. And at the same time, you really feel the bond between her friends and her family. And as the show goes on, that only gets stronger and stronger, which of course gets you more into the show and gets you more involved with the characters, which again is the sign of great writing. And Roberto Aguirre Sacasa is a great writer. So even though the show focuses on her mortal side, her connection with her friends and family and her time in her high school, it really goes in on that dark side, the witching side, and the lore behind it. And it's interesting to see how she evolves and how she adapts to that dark side of her world. And speaking of, this is some of the best lore and some of the best world building I've ever seen in a TV series in general, but definitely some of the best I've seen in a horror show, maybe since, again, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I don't like comparing the two because they're apples and oranges, but it's been a while since we had a cool teenage drama that adults also like, that has good action and is very dark. And this show kind of nails that. All of the characters in this show get a chance to shine, whether it be a small moment that has importance to everyone around them or this big overarching story that goes from the start of the season to the end of the season. The world itself, i.e. the set and production design, are just top notch. They are a character in and of itself. They add so much depth and atmosphere and darkness to the show, making it much more than another teen drama. And that's because it brings together a lot of interesting elements. You have this really cool retro aesthetic, like some of the firefighters and some other stuff they show later in the season have this 50s and 60s look. But then you also have modern touches like phones and tablets and everything else. And of course you have this dark gothic horror thread that ties everything together. The cinematography on this show is some of the best you will ever see in any television series, and it's some of the best I've seen in general for the past couple years. It's really dark. It's filled with all kinds of colors. The framing, the camera movements, it's all gorgeous, and it's all for a point.
What about you, Robert?
Can you see? Not too good.
Something that I thought was unique about the show, more so than others, I know that representation is really important now. A lot of people are really paying attention to that. This show has every color, every preference, everything across the rainbow is in the show. So if it was aiming for that, it definitely nailed that. So a lot of people will be happy with that. The CGI in the show is just awesome. I think there's one time that something looked a little cartoonish, but I think it was for a point. The rest of the time, everything looks real, looks authentic. Even if it's some kind of magical spell or whatever, it just looks kick-ass. And the CGI, like I said, is second to none when it comes to television shows. But it's not just the CGI that is strong in the show. You also have fantastic makeup effects, whether it be creatures or people's wounds. It all looks legit. It all looks really cool. You don't see any creases, nothing. It's just awesome. The Church of Satan, the demons, the Weird Sisters, the Academy of the Unseen Arts, all these different rituals, all these people seeing praise Satan. I liked it a lot. It's unapologetic. It puts it all out there for the viewer to see, and people are really going to either like it or they're not. There are a lot of interesting side stories in the show that keep it strong all the way through. It never slouches like a lot of other Netflix shows do, and I think that's really cool. Something that this show nails that a lot of other shows on Netflix and TV shows in general don't quite get right is the first season. A lot of shows that I really love, like Supernatural and Buffy, for example, because they're in that similar genre, their first seasons were kind of weak and they were hit or miss with the different episodes. But later on, they became strong and got this huge cult following, where Sabrina kind of knocks it out of the park from the first season on. There are so many good characters and side stories, and everything kind of coalesces how it should be at the end of this first season. It answers a lot of the questions that were really burning questions you want to know about. It leaves some that are unanswered, but it doesn't frustrate you because you know they're going to go into them in the second season, which thankfully happens in April. Despite this fantastical nature of the show with the witches and the horror and the Church of Satan and everything, it stays pretty remarkably grounded because of the relationships of the people, which is funny because a lot of shows that take place in the real world can't do that properly. The show is kiddish enough for like the teen set, but it's also gangster enough for grown-ups and horror fans. And it's really cool to see a show do its own thing. Like, they put everything out there, like I said, with the Church of Satan and the gore. There's orgies. There's all kinds of these different things that you wouldn't normally see in a show. And they just put it out there and they don't give a shit what people think. And I think that's great. As a matter of fact, they just actually got sued by the Church of Satan and settled out of court with them because of some of the things that happened in the show and some of the iconography that's actually used by Satan worshipers. So when the Church of Satan sues you because they're afraid you're tarnishing their image, that's pretty gangster. So that's it for the good. Now let's talk about the bad. The subject matter obviously is super dark, and it is going to offend a lot of people. A lot of like fundamentalists and religious people and conservatives are going to hate the hell out of this show. And that's one of the things about this show is I can't really tell what the demographic is. There are some things that happen that are obviously for teens. There are other things that happen for adults and for, gore hounds and horror hounds like myself. I love all that shit. I think it's amazing. But I wouldn't want some like young teenage kid watching it. Now the first half of the season is a little bit out there. It's all over the place. And I think that's because they're trying to get a lot of stuff established and trying to find its voice. And because they had to establish Sabrina's friends and family and this whole mortal side that she really connects with, that's really the weakest part of the show. It's still pretty good. It's still pretty strong. I think it's better than Riverdale and all these kind of shows. But there are a lot of other elements in the show that are much stronger. And one of the things that I always find funny about not just this show, but many others is they're targeted towards teenagers, but no one in the show thinks or talks like teenagers. Once in a while, they might say a line that's funny and it's very teenage, but there's other times where they're like philosophizing and debating and they're talking about theology and all this kind of stuff. Stuff that you wouldn't really see teenagers do. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that teenagers don't do that. It reminded me a bit of Juno. It's not like that clever and funny, and it doesn't try that hard, but it does happen throughout the entirety of the season. Another thing that I thought was kind of funny about the show, and I'm fine with it, is the fact that basically the only clear-cut bad guys in this show are men. Usually mortal men. which is a little weird, but I guess I understand what they were trying to do. People, humanity in general, can be very dark and very selfish, and a lot of people don't live by a code. And, you know, if you look at the dark side, the witching side of Sabrina's life, a lot of them, they have this code, they have these rules. So it does make sense that a bunch of white dudes caused all these problems and all these issues for this town going back hundreds of years up until now. But that's really all I have to say about the show. It is a fantastic debut, a very surprising debut, something I didn't expect and something I thoroughly enjoyed. And everyone that I've showed it to and recommended it to has also really enjoyed it, and they've binge watched the whole season pretty quickly. That being said, what is the score? Drum roll, please. 7 out of 10.